The rain fell in relentless sheets, hammering the streets of the city with a rhythm that made the world feel smaller and lonelier. Streetlights blurred in the wet haze, casting a yellow glow that barely reached the sidewalk where she stood. Emma Matthews hugged herself tightly, trying to shield her small baby from the cold drizzle. Her nurse's uniform, once crisp and white, was now soaked and clung to her thin frame. Her shoes squelched with each step as she shifted the baby in her arms, trying to keep him dry. She had missed the last bus, and the next one wouldn't come for another 40 minutes. 40 minutes might as well be an eternity when the temperature had dropped and the wind was biting through her wet coat. Her tiny son whimpered, cold and hungry, and she pressed him closer, whispering reassurances she didn't entirely believe. Every face that passed her on the sidewalk seemed indifferent, buried in their umbrellas and hurried steps, too focused on their own worlds to notice a shivering young mother at a desolate bus stop. Emma's life had been a series of sacrifices, each one made silently, invisibly. She had worked double shifts at the hospital, barely keeping up with rent and bills. After her husband had left months ago, citing too much responsibility, she was left alone with a newborn, navigating a world that seemed to have no room for mistakes, weakness, or mercy. Yet she had survived, and she would continue to survive for her son, if for nothing else. Across the street, a sleek black car rolled to a stop at the intersection. Inside, Jonathan Hart, CEO of Hart Industries, watched the rain through the windshield. He had always believed in control over markets, decisions, and people. Yet tonight, standing on the balcony of his downtown penthouse after a long day of meetings, he felt a void he could not fill with money, power, or prestige. And then he saw her. The young woman, holding a baby so small it seemed almost weightless in her arms, shivered under a threadbare umbrella. Her hair clung to her face in wet strands, her expression a mix of fear, exhaustion, and determination. Something in her stance, fragile yet defiant, captured his attention immediately. It wasn't pity he felt. It was an urgent, inexplicable pull, the kind that made a man pause in the middle of a rainy night and wonder if destiny had just knocked on his car window. Without thinking, Jonathan shifted the car into drive, navigating through puddles as he approached the bus stop. The woman had not noticed him yet, or perhaps she had but assumed a luxury car like his would never stop for someone like her. He slowed, then came to a halt just a few feet from the curb. He opened the passenger side door and raised his voice above the rain. "Come with me." Emma's heart jumped. She froze, unsure if she had heard correctly. The words sounded almost unreal, like a lifeline thrown across a stormy sea. She glanced at the car, shiny, intimidating, miles away from her reality. 1,000 doubts screamed in her mind. Who was he? Why would he care? Could she trust anyone anymore? The baby stirred, tiny fists flailing against the chill, and instinct won over pride. Emma swallowed hard, weighed the risks, and finally nodded. She could not leave him there any longer. Jonathan stepped out into the rain and hurried to her side, lifting a thick, dry blanket from the back seat. He draped it over her and the baby. The warmth from it seemed to seep into her bones, and she felt, for the first time that night, a glimmer of hope. She hesitated, torn between caution and desperation, but Jonathan's gaze held no judgment, only an invitation. "Trust me," he said quietly. His voice carried authority, but it wasn't commanding, it was protective. And something about it made Emma realize she didn't need to explain herself. She didn't have to defend every choice, every late shift, every sleepless night. She simply needed a moment of safety. Carefully, she lifted her baby into Jonathan's waiting arms, feeling the small body relax against his chest. The warmth radiating from him was unfamiliar, yet it felt safe. She climbed into the car, trying not to tremble as the leather seats absorbed the damp chill from her coat. Jonathan started the engine, and the car hummed with a quiet, reassuring power as they moved through the rainy streets. Emma kept her eyes on the window, watching the city blur into streaks of light. She wondered who this man was, why he had stopped for her, and what would happen next. Was this a fleeting kindness, or the beginning of something that might change both of their lives? Jonathan glanced at her from the rearview mirror. There was a fragility to her that pulled at something he had long suppressed. As a CEO, he had built walls around his office, around his heart, around his life. But seeing Emma holding her baby with weary determination, those walls wavered. He had spent years chasing success, but tonight, watching her, he realized there was something more vital than business deals or stock prices. The baby yawned, small and innocent, tugging at Emma's heart with every movement. She realized she had been holding her breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But it hadn't. Jonathan didn't ask for her papers, her proof, or her reason. He simply offered warmth, safety, and a quiet promise that for now she and her child were not alone. As the car turned down a quieter street, the city noise faded into a soft hum, replaced by the rhythmic sound of rain against the roof. Emma allowed herself to relax slightly, leaning back in her seat, letting the warmth of the blanket and Jonathan's presence settle around her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in months, she felt a fragile, flickering hope. Jonathan drove on in silence, letting the rain and the night fill the space between them. He didn't know what story had brought her to this bus stop, only that fate had placed her there at the precise moment. He needed to find someone who reminded him of life beyond balance sheets. "Where are we going?" Emma asked softly after a while, her voice almost drowned by the rain. Jonathan glanced at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "Somewhere safe, somewhere warm, somewhere you can rest for a little while." She didn't question it, she didn't have to. For tonight, that was enough. And as the car disappeared into the rainy city streets, two strangers, both carrying loneliness and unspoken burdens, moved toward an unexpected encounter that would change their lives forever. Jonathan drove through the wet streets in silence, the soft hum of the engine the only sound besides the rain pelting the car. Emma's hands clutched the blanket around her baby, her body still trembling, but with every mile, a small sense of relief began to seep in. She didn't know where she was going, and that terrified her. Yet, at the same time, a fragile hope whispered that maybe, just maybe, she had been given a second chance. The car finally slowed in front of a tall, modern building, its glass windows reflecting the city lights like tiny stars in the rain. Jonathan parked, and the two of them stepped out into the cool, wet night. The warmth from the car seemed to cling to them as they entered the building, the sound of the rain replaced by the faint echo of their footsteps in the marble lobby. "This way," Jonathan said, guiding her toward a waiting elevator. Emma kept her gaze downward, embarrassed and cautious. She wasn't used to this world of glass and steel, of polished floors and soft lighting. Every instinct told her to keep her distance, yet something in Jonathan's steady presence reassured her. When the elevator doors opened, she found herself in a spacious penthouse. The room smelled faintly of vanilla and polished wood. Warm lighting bathed the space, creating an atmosphere that seemed almost magical compared to the damp, cold streets outside. Jonathan set the baby down gently on a soft sofa, his hands deft and careful, almost as if he had done this before. "Sit," he said softly, indicating a chair nearby. "I'll get you some tea." Emma hesitated, then sank into the chair, feeling the weight of exhaustion finally catch up with her. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this safe, or cared for, without having to explain herself. Her son stirred, and she instinctively reached for him, but Jonathan had already wrapped him snugly in a dry blanket and placed him where she could easily pick him up. "You can rest," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I won't ask anything you're not ready to tell me." Emma blinked back tears. The world had become so harsh, so demanding, that this quiet compassion almost overwhelmed her. I don't even know your name," she admitted softly. "Jonathan," he replied, "Jonathan Hart." Her eyes widened. "Hart, the CEO." He chuckled softly, but there was no arrogance in it. "Yes, but that doesn't matter right now. What matters is that you and your baby are safe." For the first time in months, Emma allowed herself to breathe. She wrapped her arms around her son, feeling his tiny heartbeat against hers, and let a tear slide down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jonathan poured tea into a mug and handed it to her. The warmth seeped into her hands, into her chest, filling a part of her she had long thought frozen. She sipped carefully, savoring the simple comfort. As they sat in silence, the baby cooed and snuggled closer, and Emma began to feel a strange sense of belonging. She glanced at Jonathan, noticing the way he observed her with quiet attentiveness, as if he understood more than he let on. "You work at a hospital?" he asked gently, breaking the silence. Emma nodded. "I'm a nurse. It's not easy. The hours, the pressure, sometimes I feel like I'm barely holding it together." Her voice trembled. "And now with him," she gestured toward her baby, her hands shaking. "I don't know how I've managed." Jonathan leaned back, studying her. "You've managed because you're stronger than you think. Most people would have given up." She looked at him, startled. No one had ever said that to her. No one had acknowledged her struggle, her sacrifices. "Stronger, maybe," she said softly, "but I'm tired." He nodded knowingly. "I can see that, and that's why tonight you don't have to be strong. You can just be. You can rest. You can let someone else care for you, even if just for a little while." Emma swallowed hard, emotions threatening to spill over. She had lived her life surviving, never asking for help, never letting anyone in. And yet here was a stranger, powerful, confident, yet gentle, offering exactly what she had always denied herself: comfort, protection, and understanding. Hours passed as the rain continued to fall outside, the city muted beneath a curtain of water. Jonathan watched quietly as Emma fed her son, marveling at the way she handled him with such tender care despite her exhaustion. It wasn't just a mother's love. It was resilience, determination, and courage all wrapped into one fragile human form. "You don't have to explain your story to me," Jonathan said finally, breaking the silence. "I want you to feel safe, not judged." Emma looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to," he replied simply. "Sometimes helping someone is reward enough." The night wore on, and eventually the baby fell asleep in Emma's arms. She leaned back against the sofa, feeling the weight of the day and months of struggle finally lift, if only for a moment. Jonathan brought her a blanket and draped it over her shoulders, his touch gentle and careful. "Rest," he said softly. "I'll be right here if you need anything." And for the first time in a long time, Emma allowed herself to truly rest. She felt safe, cared for, and seen. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether she could trust this stranger or how her life might change. But tonight she didn't have to worry. Tonight she had shelter, warmth, and a small flicker of hope. As she drifted into a light, peaceful sleep, Jonathan sat nearby, watching over her and the baby. A strange warmth settled in his chest, a feeling he hadn't felt in years. He had spent so long chasing success, power, and control, yet here, in this quiet penthouse with a young mother and her child, he realized something profound. Connection, compassion, and human kindness mattered more than any boardroom victory. The rain continued to fall outside, washing the city clean, and inside 2 lives, both shaped by loneliness, struggle, and resilience, had intersected in a way neither of them could have predicted. The night was just beginning, and with it came the promise of new beginnings, unexpected bonds, and the fragile, beautiful possibility of love. Jonathan couldn't predict what would happen next, but one thing was certain. He had opened his doors and heart to a life that needed him, and in return, he had found something money could never buy: a sense of purpose, warmth, and a chance to truly connect. And as the first hints of dawn crept through the rain-streaked windows, Emma stirred, opened her eyes, and for the first time in months felt safe. She didn't know the future, but she knew that tonight had changed everything.